Many of you recall that we ran a charrette here for about a week. We talked with people about the contents of the vision plan that had been previously created. We looked at the existing zoning, talked a lot about the roadway itself. A couple of sort of points I guess I should make. The zoning doesn't do anything to the road. Okay. Zoning doesn't fix the road. Zoning is for private property owners and what they do. Now, it may fix the sidewalk and some of the space out between the building and the street, right? It may take care of that, but it doesn't fix the roadway itself. There is no planned project for the road, but within the next couple of years is the time to kind of get on the list and get in the city's capital improvements plan and get on the DOT list for enhancement money and get a project going so that we can make that street look like the images that you see back there in the zoning code. So this zoning code is really not for the street. It is for the private properties adjacent to it. So I'm going to walk you through the contents of this little form district. This form district becomes a part of the city's zoning code in the end. This is just a fancy kind of much more illustrated zoning, but in the end, it's still zoning. So things that are done elsewhere in the city with zoning, if those are great ideas that somehow we missed out here, bring that stuff up and we can talk about incorporating some of those ideas in the code that we've got here. So
using zoning and unified development ordinance synopsis.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Unified development ordinance also has subdivision. So this is just the zoning portion. There is no subdivision. Unified development ordinance will continue to regulate subdivision in these pieces. So thank you. The contents of this then, as I said, it's really about the districts that you saw back there on the back wall, the uses that are allowed in those districts, and then we have modified some of the city's site development standards. And so you'll see parking, landscaping, signs, outdoor display and storage. These are pieces particular to this corridor where we either wanted to modify the existing regulations or replace them whole hog. And as we go through, I'll show you what we've done in that regard. The ordinance starts out, as many do, with the traditional intent statement, a much broader intent statement than probably exists for other portions of the ordinance. Which includes things like calming the traffic and improving vehicular circulation in the corridor, some ideas that aren't generally part of the overall zoning ordinance. It also talks about portions of the existing Chapter 7 of the Unified Development Ordinance that do not apply in this area, so that nobody gets mixed up about how do these standards work together. This one conflicts with that one. It talks about what the rights of existing development are and helps you understand if you have a previously issued permit that basically as long as that one is valid, you use the old rules. So at the time that we adopt this, if somebody has a permit under the old rules, they keep building under the old rules. And a great example of that would be Haywood Village. Did I get that right? The building with the balconies and stuff that's part of a larger mixed-use project. He's got his approval for the rest of the site plan. As long as he keeps moving forward with that, he keeps building under that site plan, my new code doesn't apply. The existing regulations that apply to his site apply. So one of the first things is establishing the districts, which is that map in the back. These are exactly the same map. One of the things that we like doing is when we're doing a small area code is to help people understand the actual zoning map, which is usually something else out here somewhere, by bringing that map into the code. So here it is, including its colors that are keyed throughout the document to some of the tables. The bottom of that page then just simply starts the explanation of the district intent. You guys can read that on the back wall if you'd like for each of the districts. The next section of the ordinance is about rules that apply to all of these districts. And for the most part, these are rules about how you measure things, how you measure height, how you measure your lot area, so that you understand when you get to the numeric standards, how do I apply those? And so that's these rules. In some cases, these are different from the way that they are done today citywide. okay? And they are intentionally different. It's a significant discussion with the staff about how to make these two fit together, but make sure that we get the right things to happen, especially in terms of walkability in this corridor. And so some of these things have to actually be measured differently and done differently. The example might be height, for example, where we're expressly measuring height along the street frontage along Haywood. So if your site happens to fall back down, back behind, you can have a taller building back behind, right? You can take advantage of that height because it's measured from what we feel on Haywood Road. In addition, then, there is a section here, and I'll blow this one up for you, that starts to talk about how do we treat new buildings and additions to existing buildings when something doesn't conform to the new rules. So, for example, most of the new rules pull the buildings up much closer to the street, and none of them allow parking between the building and the street, except along Patton Avenue. We squeaked a little in there on Patton. But other than that, all along Haywood, no parking between the building and the street. So think of how many instances you know of already where there's parking between the building and the street on Haywood. Those would be considered non-conforming. Now, if you're non-conforming, you can stay forever if you stay the same. If you go to expand and add on and things like that, then these rules would kick in to help you understand what you're allowed to do. But at a certain level of investment on a non-conforming property, just like when the building code kicks in for electric in your house, at a certain level, you have to come into conformity, right? So certainly when you build a whole new building, and then typically when you build past a certain amount in value, right? So if you do a renovation that is more than 50% of the value of the existing building, then in many instances you're required to bring it up to conformity. So that doesn't mean trying to move existing buildings, but it just means that other elements of the code like parking and other kinds of things, landscaping, would kick in at that point. So that's what these pages are for. In addition, up front, there is a little information about some areas where we wanted to be especially clear. So within setback areas, certain things are typically allowed to happen, and we wanted to make sure that those can happen. And so, as an example, there are some low-impact stormwater features that are allowed to happen within those areas. So you can put your rain barrels in your side setback, for example. So that your building comes close, right, but the rain barrel can be considered not part of the structure and therefore it can sit in your side setback. So we're just trying to be clear about what elements are allowed in those kinds of settings. What can you do with your mechanical equipment and other kinds of things associated with the building? There's the measurement of height section, a piece on habitable space in attics. Since we're measuring in feet and stories, people will be more interested in what can I do with my existing stories. So we want to make sure that it's clear what you can do in those attic areas. How to measure transparency, how to measure floor-to-floor height, blank wall area. And then there's a little piece here which those of you who live very close to the edge of this district might be interested in. And that is this little piece on neighborhood compatibility. So where you're up against the most intense districts here, which is our 4-story and 6-story district, the expansion area, which is orange, and the big blue blob over at Patton, those pieces are the two that are regulated by this piece. And a bulk plane applies there so that, for example, the dark blue portion that's out at Patton Avenue, which is intended someday to rebuild the old grocery store site and perhaps rethink where the Burger King and other things, the Mexican restaurant and stuff are there. That whole 1-story set of stuff, it offers them an intensity that allows them to redevelop those sites. If they were immediately abutting a single-family area, then this bulk plane kicks in that makes sure that the tallest edge of the building is not at the back property line, right? It's not on the shared property line. It has to basically step the building or move the building into the site. So that's what that neighborhood compatibility piece does. We also have a section included in the code on what we call building elements. And the building elements, a couple of them are shown here on the screen. one of the things that often happens, and I hate to pick on them because I love them, but I saw an example today of a mountain home project that has what we call Juliet balconies, which is where it has the sliding door flush with the face of the building, and then it basically has a railing right there. There's nowhere to step out. There is no balcony really there. There's just the door. At least you get fresh air and all of that. But what this says is if you're building a balcony, it has a minimum dimension. Not only above the sidewalk to make sure we have the clear space we need, but also then a minimum depth dimension. So that's true. There are balconies included here, galleries, porches, stoops, and the kind of basic minimum standards for those to make sure that those pedestrian-related elements get built right. The next section is the districts themselves, and I'm going to go through these just very quickly, but anybody who has questions about these, this is kind of the meat and potatoes here. Let's answer those afterwards, kind of right up there looking at that. But just to help you understand, the district layout is there's 4 pages for each of the districts. The first one is the district intent, and that has a visual up on the top here. And for those of you who are really good spotters, I'm sure you can figure out exactly where these are. We've stolen some of your existing buildings and replicated them, and then this is an actual place along the corridor. They were borrowed off of Google Earth so that we could start to understand a little of the topography and some of the other things and where those buildings are placed today. And what the width of the corridor is today. So those elements are very real in these intent drawings. One of the fundamentals is if you don't like the sort of mass and bulk of what you're seeing in the intent drawing, now's the time to speak up, because this is a picture of what's allowed in this district. Okay? If you don't like the architecture, that's a different conversation. We can have that one separately. But what this is mostly about is that stuff too tall? Do we not want it so close to the road? How should this be handled? Because all those are the questions of zoning. Where's the setback? What's the height? What are the setbacks on the lot? All of those questions are kind of answered with this picture. In addition, because of the way that we were thinking about this, the following page in each of the districts is what the street looks like right there. So one of the things that happens is that in, for example, the expansion area, which is the orange on the map there, that's where we expect complete redevelopment, not so much saving existing buildings as replacing those buildings and building in anew. In that expansion area, we can get the big wide sidewalk that we all deserve along here because we can move the new building back. Whereas if I'm right up next to the theater or somewhere else in one of the core areas, there's no more land there. The street's already as narrow as it can be to accommodate all the things we're trying to do in the street, and there isn't any more sidewalk than that. We're busy trying to get the poles out of the sidewalk, at least into the bump outs. But other than that, there isn't any way to just, push that building back with a good, shoulder shove or something else and get ourselves more sidewalk. So the image of the street in that section will, show a much tighter cross section than you would see in other places. Now, when you're building a new building, you'll be doing the improvements behind the curb, right, out to the curb. So if somebody took the lumberyard site today and built that out, we would get a beautiful new streetscape all the way along the frontage of that property, right, courtesy of the developer. Whereas the rest of the corridor will have to wait for either a city project, a DOT project, some kind of joint venture, something else. But as they go piece by piece, we will get these new sidewalk components, street tree planting, and utility placement and whatever else to the extent that we can. So that's the second page of each district. The third page is the first of 2 pages that has what we call the dimensional standards. So it has the lot itself, then one we call siding, which is where does the building go on the lot. Then on the following pages, the height. We're starting to get 3D and into the bulk and mass in this next drawing. And then finally, the piece that we call activation. That's the pedestrian-oriented elements that we want treated. Door spacing, amount of windows on the front of the building, etc. So each of those are the dimensional pieces that make this thing really generate a decent building. Okay? Not a fabulous building. Nothing about this code guarantees a fabulous building. That'll be in the mind of the developer. But it guarantees a decent building, one we can feel comfortable having there, one that'll have a great interaction with the sidewalk. It'll have glass, it'll have doors, it'll have all the components that make it a good space in the future. So each of the districts is the same in that way. And let me just talk sort of generically about the intent of these that came out of our work here during the design phase. It's really to say there's two downtowns, right? Everybody's always said there's two little downtowns in West Asheville, and one's where the theater's at and the other's where Second Gear's at. Those are the dark red, and we've called those core. We couldn't quite bring ourselves to call them downtown because you have a downtown in the city somewhere already. So those are the core areas along Haywood Road. Then we have the expansion areas, this next orange district. The idea being support for the core. More people, more activity to support that existing core. Then you'll see the green pieces. Those are where the intensity falls a little bit, because if you really want the core to be where our retail and other activity is, the economists basically shared with us, if we tried to spread it out along the entire corridor, we would never have enough. We just don't have enough residential here to support retailing all along that. And we didn't want to necessarily find ourselves attracting tourists to every little dot and tittle of the corridor either, so we generate ourselves a traffic problem then. So in kind of balancing the neighborhood interest with the sort of entertainment, retailing, etc. interest, we've mapped it that way. So that's the green one, which happens to be called corridor. There's another district, the blue one, which is right at the what I call the dog leg, and everybody else calls whose curve? Beecham's curve. So right where the new signal's just gone in, the piece that starts off down the hill is this piece that we've called traditional. It really has mostly the same rules as the core. It's just that you guys have always said there's two downtowns, not three, so we didn't really want to put three cores on there. But fundamentally, many of the rules the same. One key difference here is the way we treated parking for restaurants especially. This would be a tough place to add any more restaurants in because it's very, very hard to achieve parking in this piece. There's no churches nearby. Really, there's no sink for parking right there the way there are near the other cores. So we're tougher on parking and basically saying you got to figure out a way to provide it if you're coming into this piece. So that's maybe one difference. In addition to that blue piece, then as you go on down the hill, the last piece on down towards the bridge, we've called live work. We have some concerns about accidentally establishing some kind of retail node there, given the new activity with New Belgium, right? The burger bar is probably going to get enhanced a little after New Belgium goes in, right? Because everybody's going to need a bite to eat after a beer. So instead of trying to grow a retail node at the foot of the hill, on those steep slopes on the left-hand side, on the limited kind of stepwise sites that are on the right-hand side, we would like to see something happen there. And residential alone seems probably fine. The market will probably support that. But in addition, we could see maybe some things, some gallery activity or other things leaping from the river up along this portion. So we've generated a live work idea. It would allow, as you see in this image, as you see on the left-hand side of the image, that sort of river's edge piece where basically parking is down below and tucked underneath. The ground story of the building is up at the roads level, but that ground story is allowed, and you can look at the use list, to be, for example, an art gallery. So that's where some of this live work might come from. Upstairs, residential unit, ground floor, real estate office, ground floor, something else where you could live and work in the same building. And then some of that activity being possible on the right-hand side on those shallow lots that butt right into the hillside. So that's the final district going that direction. And then the last piece is called the town district. There is an opportunity, given the low intensity of development at Patton Avenue, really for that kind of triangle of activity there that includes the single-story office buildings that are there, the bank building, where the Mexican restaurant is there, all the way up to the Burger King. All of that someday we could see redeveloping. And because of Patton Avenue being there, a huge, wide roadway, and because those sites today, even if you're standing at grade on the road, have fabulous views, this is an area of opportunity for some substantial additional residential development. And so we have shown 6 stories in this last triangular piece. Supports the corridor, relates to Patton Avenue, provides a real transition there. So those are the districts that you'll find in the document. Beyond the districts, there's a section on use, and this is just a large table listing the uses down the left, the districts across the top. If there are additional standards, they're linked away from the column in the right. There are some uses that have specific standards, and so those are included here in the use section as well. Then there is special parking requirements for this area. Part of the challenge with this area from our transportation consultant's point of view is that right now the parking lots are often not shared between owners. There's no cross access. And when you use this corridor, it's very difficult to find adjacent parking as you go down the side streets, right? As many of those side streets are very narrow, they're residentially focused. There's just not an opportunity. You also can't go around the block and get back onto the corridor again, because going around the block means, going all the way down the hill and turning your car around in somebody's driveway and coming back up the same road you just went down. It's a difficult place to use from that perspective. So parking is managed perhaps more heavily here than we would typically expect. In the expansion area where we hope to be getting new buildings, we want a little more parking to be showing up in those locations. In the core, we want those to remain vital and lively, so we don't want to put too many parking requirements on people. But in order not to get too many high demand uses, and restaurant certainly comes to mind, if we got a lot more restaurants in the core, we'd be enormously challenged to provide enough parking for them. And so their parking requirement is set more heavily to get them to think about locating in the expansion area or somewhere else in the core, near the core, where they could actually provide the parking that we need in the future. So that's what we're trying to do with the parking section of the code. It does have bicycle parking as well. In addition, there's a little piece on landscaping. For the most part, the city's regulations on landscaping will apply. There are some special small requirements here because this area is more urban. And so, for example, the tree save area and building impact landscaping requirements do not apply in this corridor. Right? So saving trees is not the highest thing on the list on any of these sites. If you get a developer who wants to save the trees, clearly you can work with them, but the requirements for tree save areas do not kick in. There are street tree requirements, so there is some planting. There is planting requirements for parking areas, so it's not that these sites will be completely denuded. It also allows a more urban street buffer for a parking edge. Normally that's a hedge in your existing code. We're allowing a short wall to apply here. Again, in this walkable area, a short wall might actually be more functional than a small hedge that gets beat up by people walking through it on a regular basis and doesn't truly work seasonally. In addition, then, we put a buffer along the back edge, but there's a 10-foot deep buffer along the outside edge of the district where it might abut RS or RM districts in the surrounding area. So if you happen to abut a commercial district, there would be no buffer, but if you're abutting RS or RM along the outside edges, then you would have to do either a fence and a wide landscape piece or a wall.
RS is residential single and OR
Yes.
is residential multifamily.
Correct, yes. Now, one of the pieces that we found impossible to understand in your existing code was the signs. And when we actually sort of figured out how your sign code worked and we were looking at the dimensional standards for the size of signs, they don't match the existing signs in the corridor. They're way bigger. So it seemed like we should tackle signs. And so we've basically provided, for the most part, standalone sign code. There are some pieces of the existing sign code on prohibited signs and a few other things that continue to apply. But we've replaced all the sign types, told you in which district you can have which kinds of signs here, and then illustrated each of those sign types for you like this. So on each of them, a description, the requirements for it, the dimensional standards, and in this case, whether it can encroach in a right-of-way or not. So that people will have a much clearer sense, hopefully, of what the community would like to see for signs, you know, in terms of the quality of signs, and trying to encourage the level of creativity that this corridor really deserves. There are some great signs already in the corridor. There's some other stuff that if the tornado came in and just picked a few of those out, I don't think we'd mind at all. So the sign code takes up a fair portion of the back of the document and includes some discussion of illumination. Staff has already helped us understand that you guys don't ever allow uplighting like the second image there shows. So we'll be replacing some of those. There are some modest changes happening even though we're presenting this. There's also a section on outdoor display and storage. So outdoor display to us is something that goes in at night, right? So you bring out your little rack of books, or you bring out your set of dresses, or whatever else, but it goes back in at night, as opposed to the pallet of lawnmowers or, you know, something like that that sits out all the time. That would be considered outdoor storage, and here that's fundamentally banned, right? So outdoor storage, kind of a no-no in the future. It basically, you can get planning commission approval of an outdoor storage. So if you happen to be, say, a muffler shop and you need a corral for keeping the old mufflers in, and since they have iridium or whatever they have in them and everybody wants to steal them and recycle them, you know, you need it all fenced in and whatever. So you could go through the planning commission and get approval for that storage, but it'd be very specific and site planned out as to where that storage is and how it's screened. The final piece of the code is a very short definition section. We try as hard as possible to sort of explain things as we go along, and so most of the definitions are embedded throughout the body of the document, and very few are required here back in the glossary at the back, but they're there for a few things that we think people might fuss about, so we've included a few. So that's a presentation of the code itself. Yes.
Can I ask a question in front of everybody?
Sure. Oh, please don't embarrass me, but
I've heard
yes.
from a lot of people. So the 6-story zone.
Yes.
And you talk about the triangle kind of in between Haywood and Patton.
Yes.
But that, on the maps, that actually goes out to like the old Ingalls site and things like
Yes.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been out and, I mean, did you guys actually go out and measure from the residential properties like
Nope.
behind Ingalls and say, okay, it wouldn't be possible to put a 6-story building on the Ingalls site, or
No.
any kind of consideration there of the ones that are on the other side of Haywood from Patton?
Understood.
Abutting the residential.
No, we did not. So do I know whether a 6-story could fit in there? No, but we could take a pretty good look at it and figure it out pretty quick. Basically, that's a 45-degree plane, so 1 foot in, 1 foot up. You need about 12 feet to get a story. So, you know, as you come in, you'll get that story.
And you have to park it.
I was going to say, the biggest problem with that site is you have to park it, right? You're gonna like if you put residential in those upper stories, you're gonna want the parking right there. Can't be down the corridor somewhere or shared with the church or something. You know, that's not going to be of interest to your tenants. So
And it has to be stair-stepped from the private
Or
property.
set so
correct, or completely set forward so that it could be a single building. So we could measure that site and answer that question, but we haven't done that yet. Thanks.
Lee, do you want to say something about this?
We would love to take specific comments about both things you like. Hopefully there's a thing or two that you might like in this. So if there's something specifically you want to say, hey, I like this, keep this in, that helps us as much as, oh, I hate this, please take this out. And Sasha's going to there'll be paper back up here in the back, and there are some pens back there. So if you have things that you'd like us to do, for example, if you want us to look specifically at some sites and say, please figure out whether on the south side of Haywood at Patton you can get a 6-story building, we'll try and tackle those things. Next up meeting is April 24, a joint session, sort of.
It's a planning and zoning work session.
It's a planning and zoning work session, and that work session is still not the formal adoption process, but that'll be an introduction like this. There will be a revised copy in between, so we're listening, and if we've got some stuff we can get done in the short time before getting their version ready, we'll get some things edited. So leave us your thoughts tonight. That would be great. So time and place for the P&Z is 4 p.m.
April 24th. I think we're
April
still nailing down the
24.
place, but it most probably will be in City Hall.
Yes, at this, yes.
So somewhere in
It'll
City
all be
Hall.
on the website, location. time.
Yep.
Is this draft going to be up on the website?
It is up on the Haywood Road website, which is at haywoodroad.code-studio.com, which I think is linked away somewhere on the city site. If you actually search for Haywood Road form-based code, it pretty much pops up. So it's there along with the Charette report that kind of was the basis for the districts. And I'm going to go back up by the drawings in the back and glad to talk to anybody.